He was the man every woman wanted. Julian Hayes, a self-made millionaire with a penthouse that kissed the clouds. She was the woman he had, Ilara, his beautiful, quiet wife. But in their marble cage, she was his secret, his punching bag. He thought she was a nobody, an orphan with no one to turn to. He didn't know Ilara was hiding a secret of her own, a secret worth billions. And as his hand struck her for what felt like the 300th time, he had no idea he wasn't just hitting his pregnant wife. He was signing his own death warrant, delivered by the most powerful man in the city, her father. The penthouse at 15 Central Park West was less a home and more a statement. It was a 3-story monument of glass and marble, offering a god's-eye view of New York City. To the outside world, Ilara Hayes was living a fairy tale. She was the ethereally beautiful wife of Julian Hayes, the wolf of Wall Street's new generation, a man who had clawed his way to a 9-figure net worth before his 35th birthday. Their life, as curated on Instagram, was a whirlwind of galas, benefit dinners, and spontaneous trips to Milan. Julian was intoxicating. He was all shark-white smiles, custom-tailored suits, and a relentless, magnetic energy that had pulled Ilara in 2 years ago. She had been Lara, just Lara, working part-time at an art gallery in Soho, deliberately living off her own small salary, desperate to find someone who would love her for her mind, not her last name. Her last name was Sterling, a name that owned shipping lanes, tech conglomerates, and, if rumors were true, half of downtown Manhattan. But Julian didn't know that. He thought he had married a bright, beautiful, but blessedly ordinary girl. And at first, it was perfect. He was doting. He saved her from her quiet life, showering her with gifts she had to pretend to be dazzled by. The first crack appeared 6 months after the wedding. A merger he'd been counting on fell through. He came home, not with a storm's fury, but with a chilling, Arctic silence. He'd barely looked at her as he poured a $300 whiskey. "Did you hear?" he asked, his back to her. "I saw the news. Julian, I'm so sorry. But you'll bounce back. You always—" The glass shattered against the fireplace. "What the hell would you know about bouncing back?" he spun, his face a mask of contempt. "You, who's never worked a real day in your life, you're just a decoration. My beautiful, stupid decoration." Ilara had flinched. "That's not fair," he advanced on her. "Fair? I'm out there bleeding in a boardroom full of killers, and I come home to this. To you. You can't even manage the household staff properly. The steak was overcooked last night. Julian, you're just upset about the deal." He shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a hard, 2-handed shove that sent her sprawling backward onto the silk Aubusson rug. Her head hit the edge of the coffee table. Not hard enough to bleed, but hard enough to send a shockwave of pain and disbelief through her. He stood over her, his chest heaving. He looked disgusted. Not with himself, but with her. "Pathetic," he spat, and walked away. That was the first time. The 300 times the world would later whisper about wasn't an exaggeration of a single event. It was the reality of 1,000 small, brutal moments. It was the crushing grip on her wrist that left a bracelet of bruises. It was the accidental shove into a door frame. It was the locked door when she displeased him, leaving her without food for a day. It was the nights he'd come home, drunk on power or failure, it didn't matter which, and take his rage out on her body, reminding her that he had made her, and he could just as easily break her. She became a ghost in her own home, an expert in makeup, covering the yellowing bruises on her arms, the split on her lip. She told her friends she was clumsy. She stopped seeing them anyway. Julian made it too difficult, complaining about her commoner friends. Then, one rainy Tuesday, everything changed. She had been dizzy and nauseous for a week, a symptom she'd blamed on stress. But as she stood in the vast, white marble bathroom, her hand trembled, holding a small white stick. 2 pink lines, pregnant. A wave of icy terror, followed by a fragile, desperate hope, washed over her. A baby. Their baby. This would fix it. This had to fix it. A child would soften him, remind him of the love they'd once shared. He wouldn't dare hurt her if he knew she was carrying his son, his heir. She spent the day planning. She would cook his favorite meal, the one the private chef always got wrong. She would wear the blue dress he'd bought her in Paris. She would tell him, and he would hold her, and the Julian she'd fallen in love with would finally come back. She waited. 7 p.m. became 9 p.m. At 11 p.m., the penthouse door slammed open. He stumbled in, his tie undone, the smell of whiskey and a strange, sharp perfume clinging to him. "Julian?" she asked, her voice small, from the dining room. He ignored her, stalking toward the study. "Julian, I have something to tell you," she said, following him, her hand instinctively going to her still flat stomach. "It's wonderful news." He turned, his eyes bloodshot. He'd lost a major client. She saw it in the tension of his jaw. "Wonderful news," he sneered. "Did you manage to buy a new pair of shoes without maxing out the card? Is that the big news, Ilara?" "No, it's... Julian, we're..." He didn't want to hear it. He wanted a target. He saw her, standing there, hopeful, and it enraged him. "What? Spit it out. Or are you too stupid to even form a sentence?" "I'm pregnant," she whispered, tears welling. There was a silence. He didn't look happy. He looked inconvenienced. "Pregnant?" he repeated, flatly. "Yes," she said, a small smile trying to form. "A baby, Julian, our baby." "Great," he said, turning to his desk. "Just perfect. Another goddamn liability." The hope in her chest fractured. "A liability?" "Julian, it's your child." "It's a problem," he roared, sweeping a stack of files off his desk. "It's a distraction. I'm trying to build an empire, and you bring me this mess." "How can you say that?" she cried, stepping forward. "Get out of my face," he hissed. "No, you have to listen to me. This is our..." His hand flew. It wasn't a shove. It was a full, open-handed slap that sent her head snapping to the side, her ear ringing with a deafening pop. She crumpled to the floor, her hand flying to her stomach, a sob of pure terror catching in her throat. He stood over her, the same disgust from that first night, magnified 100 times. "I said," he whispered, his voice dangerously low, "get out." As she crawled away, hiding her new, desperate secret, Ilara Hayes knew. The baby wouldn't save her. It had just given him a second target. The pregnancy did not bring a truce. It brought a new, terrifying chapter of cruelty. Julian, now aware of her condition, as he called it, saw it not as a vulnerability to be protected, but as a lever to be used. The physical abuse lessened in frequency, but it was replaced by a psychological warfare so precise it threatened to shatter her mind. "You're getting fat, Ilara," he'd say casually over breakfast, watching her pick at a piece of fruit. "You'd better not let yourself go. I didn't marry a woman who would let herself go." He controlled her food. "The doctor said no salt," he'd snap, telling the chef to prepare her bland, tasteless meals. "You're swelling up, it's disgusting." He would then order a lavish 5-course meal for himself and his associates, forcing her to sit at the table and watch. He isolated her completely. Her phone was accidentally dropped in a glass of water. A new one was provided, but it was a gift from him, and she knew with chilling certainty that it was monitored. Her emails, her texts, her calls, all of it was a performance. Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper, a stern woman in her late 50s, was the only other person in the penthouse. She saw the bruises Elara tried to hide. She saw the fear in Elara's eyes when Julian's keys rattled in the lock. But Mrs. Evans was paid an exorbitant salary for her silence. She would avert her gaze, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line of practiced ignorance. The 300 times continued, evolving. It was the time he joked at a dinner party that Elara had baby brain and was barely coherent, laughing as the table of his sycophantic friends laughed with him. It was the night he backed her into a wall, his hand gripping her jaw, his face inches from hers. "You are nothing without me," he'd hissed. "You came from nothing. I gave you this life. You and that thing inside you exist because I allow it." He didn't know. He truly, arrogantly, believed he had married a pretty, penniless nobody from a non-existent family. It was the core of his power over her. He was her god, and she had no one else. Elara was now 4 months pregnant. A small, delicate bump was visible beneath her clothes. Her terror was no longer for herself, but for the life inside her. She felt it move for the first time, a tiny, fluttering kick, while Julian was in the next room, screaming at his broker on the phone. "I have to get out," she thought, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. He will hurt this baby. He will trap it. He will raise it to be just like him. But how? He had her passport. He controlled all the money. The doormen in their building were his employees, paid to report her every move. She was a prisoner in a glass tower. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday in October. Julian was on the verge of closing the biggest deal of his career, an acquisition of a rival tech firm. It would finally make him a billionaire, not just a millionaire. The stress had made him volatile, a human explosive with a faulty timer. He came home early. Elara was in the nursery. She had been quietly, almost secretly, trying to put together, holding a pair of tiny white booties. He filled the doorway. "What is this?" It's the nursery, Julian. For the baby. I told you not to spend money on this crap," he said, walking in. He picked up a small, wooden rocking horse. "How much was this?" "It was a gift, from one of my old friends," she lied, her heart pounding. "Your old friends?" he sneered. "The gallery girl and the barista? What, did they pool their tip money for this?" He threw the horse against the wall, where it splintered. "Julian, no, please." "This is what I'm talking about, Elara. You have no vision. My son is not going to be surrounded by this cheap, sentimental garbage." "He's my son too," she screamed, the words tearing out of her. His face went blank. The Arctic cold returned. "What did you say?" I said, "He's my son too, and you can't just—" He advanced on her, backing her against the wall, right next to the pale yellow crib. "You have nothing," he said, his voice a venomous whisper. "This baby is a haze. It is mine. You are just the vessel. An inconvenient, emotional, stupid vessel. I hate you," she breathed, the words tasting like ash. He smiled. It was the worst thing she had ever seen. "Good. Hate is a strong emotion. It's better than the sniveling you usually do." He grabbed her by the upper arms, his fingers digging in like claws. He shook her, hard. "You will learn your place, Elara. You and the it. Stop. You're hurting me. You're hurting the baby," she shrieked, trying to twist away. He didn't care. He shoved her, hard, just as he had that first night. But this time she was off balance. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the leg of the crib. She fell, hard. She landed sideways, her hip and shoulder taking the impact, but her stomach. She felt a sharp, tearing pain deep inside. She cried out, curling into a ball, her hands flying to her abdomen. The baby! Oh God, the baby! Julian froze. For a single, fleeting second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't concern, it was fear. Not for her, not for the baby, but for himself. Fear of the consequences. Get up, he ordered, his voice shaking with rage. Stop being so dramatic. You're fine. Elara couldn't move. The pain was sharp, and a terrifying warmth was spreading. I think I'm bleeding, she whimpered, looking at her hands. Julian's face went white. God damn it! He grabbed his phone, but he didn't call 911. He called his private physician, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who owed him. Finch, he barked into the phone. Get to my penthouse. Now. It's my wife. She fell. He hung up and looked down at Elara, who was sobbing on the nursery floor, surrounded by the wreckage of the rocking horse. His expression was not one of comfort. It was one of pure, unadulterated loathing. You, he seethed, are going to ruin everything. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone on the floor. As she lay there, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, Elara knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had just tried to kill their child. And he would try again. Dr. Finch arrived, a gaunt man with nervous eyes and a black leather bag. He gave Elara a cursory exam, his hands cold and impersonal. He administered a sedative for the shock and pronounced that, miraculously, the fetus's heartbeat was still present, though faint. She must stay in bed. Complete rest, no stress, he instructed Julian, who nodded impatiently, already on a call. The no stress was a mockery. Julian moved her into the guest room, a cold, sterile space with grey walls and a view of a neighbouring skyscraper. He locked the door from the outside. Doctor's orders, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Complete rest. Mrs. Evans will bring you your meals. She was a prisoner. The 300 beatings had become one singular, crushing act of imprisonment. For 3 days, Elara drifted in and out of a sedative haze. Mrs. Evans would appear, her face a mask of ironed-out neutrality, place a tray on the bedside table, and leave, the lock snicking shut behind her. Elara ate what she could, forcing down the bland broth and dry toast, feeling the tiny, terrified life inside her. Hold on, little one. Please, hold on. I will get us out. On the 4th day, the fog in her head began to clear. With it came a clarity so sharp it hurt. Julian was not just an abuser. He was a monster. He had locked her away to protect his billion-dollar deal from the inconvenience of a hysterical, pregnant wife. If she lost the baby, he would blame her. If she kept it, he would own it. She had to act. She scanned the room. It was featureless. No phone, no computer. The windows were sealed. She was in a sky-high tomb. She lay back, pressing her hand to her stomach. Think, Elara. Think like him. Where is the weakness? Julian was arrogant. He believed her to be stupid, weak, and utterly cowed. He had taken her phone, but he hadn't searched her. He had simply moved her from the master suite to the guest room while she was half conscious. Her hand slipped under the pillow. Nothing. She checked the mattress. Nothing. She sat up, her body aching, and slid her feet to the floor. She went to the closet, which contained only a few silk robes. She ran her hands along the hems, the pockets. Nothing. Despair, cold and sharp, began to creep in. Then she remembered. The night of the gala. 6 months ago. Julian had been charming, the perfect husband. But he had been cruel to a waiter, snapping his fingers and calling him boy. Elara, mortified, had slipped away and apologized, pressing $100 bill into the man's hand. That night, she had realized Julian's charm was a switch, not a personality. That same night, she had taken an old, prepaid burner phone she'd kept from her Lara days, a phone her father had insisted she keep for absolute emergencies. She had hidden it. Where? Think. Somewhere he would never look. Somewhere he found distasteful. She went into the guest bathroom. Behind the toilet, taped to the back of the cold porcelain cistern, was a small, black, plastic object wrapped in a silk scarf. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unwrap it. The battery was low. Of course it was. She hadn't touched it in months, but it turned on. 1 bar. She had 1 call, maybe 2. She couldn't call 911. Julian was the 911 in this city. He donated to the police commissioner's benevolent fund. He had officers on his payroll. They would see a domestic dispute, a hysterical, pregnant wife, and they would call her husband. Julian would come, smile his shark's smile, and take her home. And then he would end her. There was only 1 number she could call, a number she had been forced to memorize as a child, right after her own name and address. She dialed the 10 digits. It rang once, twice. A crisp, British voice answered. Mr. Sterling's private line. It was his executive assistant, Eleanor. Eleanor, Elara whispered, her voice cracking. It's me, it's Sparrow. The line went utterly silent. Sparrow was her father's code name for her. It meant, drop everything. 1 moment, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly infused with steel. Elara waited, hearing the muffled sound of a door opening. A vital call. I need the room. The voice was deep, powerful, and impatient. It was her father, Arthur Sterling. He was in a meeting. This is Sterling. Dad, she sobbed, the single word collapsing under the weight of 2 years of pain. The entire world seemed to stop. Arthur Sterling was in the middle of a hostile takeover negotiation, a $20 billion deal. The room was full of lawyers and rival executives. He had been in the process of eviscerating his opponent's argument. At the sound of that one broken word, Arthur Sterling's face, famously impassive, went pale. He turned his back on the room, his billion-dollar deal forgotten. Elara, where are you? Are you hurt? He locked me in, she whispered, a new wave of tears coming. Dad, he hit me. He pushed me. The baby. I'm pregnant. I'm bleeding. The silence on the other end was more terrifying than a shout. Arthur Sterling was a man who controlled global markets. He was not a man who was controlled by emotion. He was processing, computing. Who? He asked. The one-word question was flat, cold. It was the voice of a man signing an execution order. My husband, she choked out. Julian Hayes. Hayes, Arthur repeated, etching the name into his memory. I don't know him. He doesn't know you, Dad. That was the point. He thinks I'm nobody. He thinks I have nothing. A terrible, cold understanding dawned on Arthur. His daughter's experiment in a normal life had become a horror story. Give me the address, he commanded. She gave him the penthouse address. I am sending my team. Their leader is Marcus. His code name is Wolf. Do not speak to anyone else. Do not let anyone else in. Can you keep the door locked from your side? No, he has the key. He locked it from the outside. Understood. He was already typing on his console. Julian Hayes. Is he there now? No, he's at a meeting, the final merger. He's been gone for hours. But he could come back. He won't, Arthur said. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a fact. Stay off the phone. Keep it hidden. Wolf will be there in 20 minutes. Dad, I'm scared. You are not, Arthur Sterling said, his voice a sudden, iron-clad promise that wrapped around her. You are a Sterling, and he has just made the last mistake of his life. I am coming. He hung up. Arthur Sterling turned to the stunned boardroom. Gentlemen, he said, his voice lethally calm, this meeting is over. My offer is rescinded. I'd advise you all to sell. He walked out, leaving a $20 billion crater in his wake without a backward glance. He dialed his head of security. Marcus, he said, code Sparrow Eclipsed. Address 15 Central Park West, Penthouse A. The husband is Julian Hayes. Hostile. Extract my daughter. And Marcus, bring the Wolf package. Full asset dissolution. 20 minutes later, Elara heard a sound, but it wasn't the rattle of Julian's key. It was a faint click from the hallway, followed by the sound of high-density metal being drilled at an impossibly high speed. It was over in seconds. The lock on her door, a high-tech smart lock Julian had bragged cost $5,000, simply snicked open. The door didn't swing open. It was pushed, slowly. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed not in a uniform, but in a perfectly tailored dark grey suit that couldn't hide the breadth of his shoulders. He had a calm face, sharp blue eyes, and an earpiece. He was the man she'd seen standing 10 feet behind her father her entire life. Marcus, she breathed in relief. Ms. Elara, he said, his voice a low, respectful baritone. He never called her Mrs. Hayes. Are you able to walk? I think so. Good. We're leaving. He was not alone. 2 other men, dressed in similar dark attire, were in the apartment. One was at the front door, the other in Julian's study. Clear, the one in the study said. Systems neutralized. They hadn't just bypassed the lock. They had taken over the entire building's security system. The doormen downstairs, Julian's paid spies, were currently watching a looped feed of an empty lobby. Mrs. Evans? Elara whispered, worried about the housekeeper. Is having a very pleasant and very sudden extended holiday. Her bank account was credited. She's on a flight to Bermuda, Marcus said, walking to the bed. He pulled a small device from his pocket and swept it over the room. It chirped. He found the tiny camera Julian had hidden in the smoke detector. Marcus crushed it in his hand. He was watching me. The violation made her sick. Not anymore. He held out a long cashmere coat. Let's go. We have a medical team waiting in the car. He guided her out of the room. The penthouse she had once found so beautiful now looked garish. A cold, brassy trap. She didn't look back. They rode the private elevator down to the garage. Not the residence garage, but the sub-level service garage. A black, armored Mercedes S-Class was waiting, its engine purring. The second she was inside, a woman in medical scrubs began taking her vitals. You're safe, Ms. Sterling, the woman said, her voice kind. We're taking you to the facility. As the car pulled out, merging silently into traffic, Elara looked back at the glass tower. She felt, for the first time in 2 years, that she could breathe. Meanwhile, Julian Hayes was on top of the world. He had just signed the deal. The ink was still wet. He was, pending the final wire transfers, a billionaire. He'd done it. He was the king. He celebrated, as he always did, with champagne and the blonde associate who had been chasing him for months. He didn't think of Elara once. He finally rolled into his building's private garage at 2 a.m., drunk, arrogant, and victorious. He took the private elevator up. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Elara, he called out, striding into the penthouse. The lights were on. Elara, you bitch, I told you to keep the lights dim. He went to the guest room. The door was ajar. He frowned. He had locked that. He pushed it open. The room was empty. The bed was made. A flicker of annoyance, not fear, sparked in him. "Elara!" he roared. He stormed through the penthouse, the master bedroom, the kitchen, the study, the nursery. Empty. She was gone. His first thought was that she had run, fled. How? He had her passport. He had her money. He grabbed his phone to check the security feed. The app wouldn't load. Network error. He stormed to the study. The high-tech server that ran his smart home was dead. The screen was black. A small, circular hole had been drilled directly through the hard drive. A cold dread, entirely separate from his anger, began to prickle his skin. This wasn't a desperate, pregnant wife running away. This was something else. He called the front desk. "This is Hayes. Did you see my wife leave?" The doorman, a man named Tom, sounded confused. "No, Mr. Hayes. She's not on my logs. No one has gone in or out of your elevator since you left this morning." "That's impossible. Look again." "Sir, I'm looking. The system is... Wait, the cameras were down for maintenance for about 15 minutes. An emergency repair around 8 p.m. Julian slammed the phone down. 8 p.m. She'd been taken, but by whom? A rival? He had hundreds. Was this a kidnapping? A ransom attempt? He called his head of security, a thuggish ex-cop. "Get over here, now! She's gone!" Then he did what he always did. He controlled the narrative. He called the police. "Officer, my wife. She's pregnant, and she's been very unstable," Julian said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "She's run off. I'm worried she's a danger to herself." "Yes. Elara Hayes. No, she has no family. No one at all." He was establishing his alibi. The hysterical, runaway wife. He was the victim. He had no idea that 30,000 feet above him, Elara was on a private Sterling medical jet, sleeping under a warm blanket, a fetal heart monitor, tracking the steady, strengthening beat of her child. He had no idea that in a high-rise in Midtown, Arthur Sterling was sitting in a dark office with his legal team. "He's reported her missing," Marcus said, reading the police dispatch. "He's claiming she's mentally unstable." Arthur Sterling looked at the photo his team had pulled from Julian's security feed, the one of Elara, crumpled on the nursery floor. "Good," Arthur said, his voice like gravel. "Let him. Let the world see how concerned he is. It will make the fall that much more spectacular." The trap was set. Julian Hayes had just walked right into it. Elara awoke in a room that was the antithesis of Julian's penthouse. The walls were a soft cream. The furniture was old, deep-grained oak, and sunlight streamed in through a window overlooking a vast, green, misty forest. It smelled like clean air and old books. This was the facility, a private, secure medical wing on the grounds of the Sterling family's upstate New York estate, a place so private it didn't appear on any map. Her father was sitting in an armchair by the window, reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked up as she stirred. "You're safe," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a statement of fact. "The baby?" she whispered, her hand moving to her stomach. "It's fine," Arthur said, folding the paper. "Resilient. Like her mother. The doctors said the next 48 hours are critical, but the bleeding has stopped. You are not fine. You're severely malnourished, and your arm has a hairline fracture that quack doctor of his missed." Elara sat up, wincing. The full story poured out of her. Not just the fall, but the 2 years of it. The shoves, the slaps, the locks, the verbal degradation, the isolation. She told him how she'd hidden her identity, how she'd been so desperate to be loved for herself. "And I failed," she concluded, tears streaming down her face. "I was so stupid, Dad." He was right. I am pathetic. Arthur Sterling, a man who had made prime ministers tremble, stood up and did something he hadn't done in a decade. He sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. His own was warm and surprisingly gentle. "You are not pathetic," he said, his voice rough. "You were lied to. You are a Sterling. You value trust. That is not a weakness. It is a quality he could neither possess nor understand." He stood, his paternal moment over, his CEO persona clicking back into place. "You," he said, "will heal. You will focus on my grandchild. I will handle Julian Hayes." "What are you going to do?" she asked. Arthur looked out the window. Julian Hayes built his empire on a foundation of debt, leveraged buyouts, and media manipulation. He's a house of cards. "I," he said, a thin, cold smile touching his lips, "am the wind." "I don't want him ruined," Ilara whispered. Arthur turned, his eyes hard. "He locked you in a room. He struck you while you were carrying his child. Ruined is a luxury he no longer deserves. I am not going to ruin him, Ilara. I am going to erase him." The war began without a single shot fired. Julian Hayes woke up the next morning to a storm. He was still playing the part of the concerned husband, giving tearful quotes to page 6, which had picked up the story of the missing millionaire's wife. His first call was from his bank. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know how to tell you this," said his private banker, a man Julian bullied regularly. "The underwriters for the K-Tech merger, they've pulled out." Julian's blood ran cold. "What? They can't. We signed. The deal is done." It seems there was a moral turpitude clause in the financing agreement. Pending an investigation, a personal matter. "What personal matter?" Julian roared. "Sir, the news about your wife. It's made the investors skittish." "Skittish? It's a missing person report." I have to go, Mr. Hayes." The banker hung up. Julian threw his phone across the room. The deal, his billion-dollar ticket, wasn't just stalled, it was collapsing. He had leveraged everything to make it happen. If it died, he wouldn't just be a millionaire, he'd be in debt. Deeply. He scrambled, calling his lawyers, his investors. No one answered. Or rather, they answered, but their assistants told him they were in a meeting. He had been frozen out. The Wolf of Wall Street was suddenly a pariah. He didn't connect it. He couldn't. He thought it was the bad press. He thought it was a rival. He never, not for 1 second, thought of Lara, his stupid, penniless wife. She was the victim he was using for his narrative, not the cause of his downfall. Meanwhile, in a sterile data processing center owned by Sterling Global, a team of forensic accountants, the Wolf Pack, were doing what they did best. They were following the money. "He's dirtier than we thought, Mr. Sterling," Marcus reported on a secure line. "Hayes Innovations is a shell game. He's been using offshore accounts to short his own acquisitions. It's sloppy, but illegal." "Find it all," Arthur ordered. "Every wire transfer, every hidden file, and find me Dr. Alistair Finch, the man who diagnosed stress." Dr. Finch was pulled out of an operation. 2 quiet men in suits were waiting for him. They didn't threaten him. They simply presented him with a file. It contained photos of him meeting with a known drug trafficker. It contained a full record of his gambling debts. "You have 2 options, Doctor," one of the men said, his voice pleasant. "Option 1. You sign this affidavit detailing your examination of Ms. Hayes, your false diagnosis, and the instructions Mr. Hayes gave you. You will lose your license, but you will not go to prison." "And option 2, Finch whispered, sweating. "Option 2 is that this file is sent to the DEA and the New York State Medical Board. Your choice. Dr. Finch signed the affidavit. The first domino had fallen. Julian Hayes, frantically trying to stop his K-Tech deal from bleeding out, had no idea that the foundation of his entire life was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by a man whose name he didn't even know. He was too arrogant to see the truth. He was just a millionaire. He had picked a fight with a titan. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in silent, systematic destruction. Julian Hayes felt like he was drowning in slow motion, with no idea who was holding his head under the water. His world shrank. First, the K-Tech deal officially imploded. The press, which he had courted, now turned on him. The concerned husband narrative was dying, replaced by whispers of a volatile temperament and financial irregularities. Then the IRS called. It wasn't a standard inquiry. It was a full-scale, top-to-bottom audit of Hayes Innovations and Julian Hayes, personally. They had received an anonymous tip from a disgruntled former employee. This tip was, in fact, a perfectly curated 500-page dossier, complete with encrypted transaction codes and offshore account numbers, delivered by Arthur Sterling's legal team. Julian's accounts were frozen, all of them. He tried to liquidate assets. He tried to sell the penthouse. But at Ellis Pendens, a notice of a pending lawsuit had been filed against the property, rendering it unsellable. He tried to sell his art, his cars, his watch collection. The auction houses wouldn't touch them. Word was out on the street. Julian Hayes was toxic. He sat in his glass penthouse, the power cut off to half the rooms to save money, drinking cheap whiskey, a shadow of the man he had been. He was enraged, confused, and terrified. He kept calling the police about Alara, but his concerned husband act was wearing thin. "Mr. Hayes," a tired detective told him, "we have no leads, and frankly, we have other priorities. We're getting a lot of tips, sir. Not about her, but about you." His corporate credit cards were declined. His social club memberships were revoked. The friends who had drunk his champagne and laughed at his jokes now crossed the street to avoid him. In 10 days, he had gone from the wolf to a ghost. He still didn't know who was responsible. He blamed the investors from the K-Tech deal. He blamed his old mentor. He blamed everyone but the quiet, bruised woman who had vanished from his guest room. He fired his staff. He was alone in the vast, silent apartment. The final blow came not with a bang, but with a simple, official-looking letter taped to his $50,000 Italian-made front door. It was a foreclosure notice. The bank, which had been so eager to finance his life, was calling in the loan. The anonymous entity that had bought up his debt was demanding payment in full. He was bankrupt. As he slid to the floor, the notice clutched in his hand. His rage finally found a target. "Alara," he hissed, his voice raw. "That bitch! She did this!" He still didn't know how. He thought she had run to a rival, sold his secrets. He still saw her as a pawn, a tool. The idea that she, herself, had any power was inconceivable. He had one thing left, a last-ditch hope. The entity that had bought his debt, a holding company called ASG Capital, had agreed to a meeting. They were considering a restructuring. This was it, his chance to get back in. He put on his last good suit, which hung loosely on his stress-thin frame. He used the last of his cash to take a taxi to a sleek, black glass tower in Midtown, a building that dwarfed his own. He walked into the lobby of Sterling Global. He didn't recognize the name. He was too small-time to even register on Arthur Sterling's radar. He was sent to the 80th floor, the Wolf's Den, as the company called it. He walked into a vast, minimalist boardroom. The view of the city was so powerful, It made his own penthouse look like a basement apartment. At the far end of a 40-foot black marble table sat one man, his back to the window, silhouetted like a god. "Mr. Hayes," the man said, his voice like gravel. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Julian sat, his heart hammering. This was it. This was his savior. "Mr. Sterling, is it?" Julian said, trying to muster his old, shark-like charm. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. There's been a significant misunderstanding with my finances. My wife, it's a complicated, personal matter that has unfortunately spilled into my business." "Yes," Arthur said, leaning forward. The light hit his face. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen empires rise and fall. "It seems you have misplaced something of mine." Julian frowned. "Misplaced? Sir, I'm not sure My daughter." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Julian's blood turned to ice water. He stared, uncomprehending. Your daughter?" "Elara." Julian's world tilted on its axis. The charm, the arrogance, the self-preservation, it all evaporated, replaced by a primal, bottomless dread. He looked at the man's face, really looked at it, and for the first time, he saw Elara. He saw her eyes, her bone structure. "Lara," he whispered. "Elara. Sterling." "You never bothered to ask her last name, did you?" Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You just saw a pretty, ordinary thing to be owned. To be decorated, I believe was your word." Julian shot to his feet. "This is a trick. She's an orphan. She told me." "She told you she was Lara, and that she didn't have a family she was close to," Arthur corrected, standing to his full, intimidating height. "Both true. She was not close to me, because I was busy. A mistake I am now rectifying." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Marcus, send them in." The boardroom doors opened. Julian turned. It wasn't just lawyers, it was two uniformed NYPD detectives. "Julian Hayes," the detective said, his voice flat. "You're under arrest." "Arrest?" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking. "For what? For debt? This is a civil matter. You can't—" "For the assault and kidnapping of Elara Sterling Hayes," the detective said, pulling out handcuffs. "We have a signed, notarized affidavit from Dr. Alistair Finch, detailing the injuries he treated you for, the ones you instructed him to cover up. We have the recordings from your smart home. All 300 of them." Julian's face went white. The camera, the one he had installed. He'd been recording himself. He'd been so sure of his power, he'd never thought his own surveillance would be used against him. "You can't!" he screamed, backing away. "She's my wife. It's my word against hers." "No," Arthur Sterling said. He gestured to the large screen on the wall. It flickered to life. It was the nursery. It was Elara, holding the white booties. It was Julian, his face twisted in rage. It was the shove, the fall, the sound of her cry. The camera in the smoke detector, which Marcus had retrieved, had recorded everything. Julian Hayes collapsed into the chair, a broken, rattling sound coming from his chest. You, who are you?" he whimpered. "I," Arthur Sterling said, adjusting his cufflink as the detectives cuffed Julian, "am the man who owned the bank that financed your penthouse. I am the man whose company your investors fled to, and I am the father of the woman you tried to kill." He leaned in, his voice a whisper that Julian would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. "You built your life on a house of cards, Mr. Hayes. You just forgot that I own the table, the cards, and the air you breathe. Get him out of my sight." The trial of Julian Hayes was not the media circus he might have craved in his former life. Arthur Sterling ensured it wasn't. It was quiet, swift, and devastatingly precise. Arthur's legal team, the best in the world, didn't argue. They presented. They presented the video from the nursery. They presented Dr. Finch's tearful, detailed confession. They presented the testimony of Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper, who, once guaranteed protection and a comfortable retirement, detailed the pattern of abuse, the locked doors, the malnutrition. They presented the audio recordings from the penthouse, Julian's rages, his threats, his cold, calculated cruelty. The 300 times were no longer a vague whisper. They were a data-backed, itemized list of horrors. Julian's high-priced lawyers, paid for by a legal defense fund he could no longer access, as his assets were now part of a massive criminal and civil forfeiture, tried to paint Elara as a gold digger, a liar who had hidden her identity. The Sterling prosecutor, a sharp woman named Maria Liu, dismantled them. Mr. Hayes's defense, she addressed the jury, her voice ringing with clarity, is that he was tricked, that he was deceived. And they are right. He was tricked. He was tricked into believing his wife was weak. He was tricked into believing she had no one. He was tricked into believing his violence had no consequences. He didn't marry Elara Sterling, the heiress. He married Lara, the part-time gallery assistant. He abused Lara. He starved Lara. He beat Lara. His actions were not born of a high-stakes world. They were born of a deep-seated, cowardly rot that preys on those he deems beneath him. The only person who tricked Julian Hayes was his own monstrous arrogance. Julian, in his cheap, off-the-rack suit, could only watch. The wolf was gone. In his place was a pale, trembling man, staring at the jury, realizing that for the first time in his life, his money and his smile meant nothing. The verdict came back in under an hour. Guilty, on all counts. Assault with intent, reckless endangerment, kidnapping, for the unlawful imprisonment in the guest room. The judge, a woman known for her severity, looked at Julian with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "you lived in a glass tower, yet you believed your horrific crimes were invisible. You were a man of immense privilege who used his power not to build, but to systematically destroy a woman who was dependent on you, a woman carrying your own child. The court finds your lack of remorse, your arrogance, and the sheer, calculated cruelty of your actions to be appalling." He was sentenced to the maximum, 25 years. As he was led away, pale and shackled, he looked back. He was searching for Elara. She was not there. Then he saw him. In the back row of the courtroom, Arthur Sterling sat alone, his expression unreadable. He watched Julian being dragged out, held his gaze for one cold second, and then stood, straightened his suit, and walked out. The war was over. 6 months later, the world was white. The snow fell thick and silent over the Sterling estate, blanketing the hundreds of acres of forest in a pristine, quiet peace. Elara stood at the window, not of the medical wing, but of her own cottage, a beautiful stone and glass house her father had built for her on the edge of a lake. She was no longer the frail, terrified ghost from the penthouse. Her hair, which Julian had insisted she keep long and blonde, was cut into a smart, dark bob. The color had returned to her cheeks. She was healing. She was also not alone. A soft cry came from the bassinet behind her. Elara turned, a gentle smile touching her lips. She walked over and lifted her daughter, Aurora. She had named her Aurora for the new dawn. She was small, perfect, and had her mother's eyes, and, Elara sighed, her father's iron-clad grip on her finger. "Shh, my love," Elara whispered, rocking her. "It's all over." She was in therapy, both physical and mental. The scars on her psyche were deeper than the fracture in her arm, but she was working on them. She was, as her father had commanded, healing. The door to the cottage opened, letting in a swirl of cold air. Arthur Sterling stepped in, brushing snow from his overcoat. He was, Elara noted, getting softer. Or at least his edges were. "She's awake," he said. It wasn't a question. "She has your timing," Elara said, smiling. Arthur came over, and his entire imposing demeanor melted as he looked at the baby. He offered a single, large finger, which Aurora immediately latched onto. "She'll be running the company in 20 years, he grunted, a sound Elara recognized as a laugh. "She will be whatever she wants to be," Elara said, her voice firm, "and she will be loved for exactly who she is." "No hiding." "Agreed," Arthur said. He looked at Elara. "The final asset auction finished. Hayes Innovations is gone. The penthouse sold. After settling his criminal debts and the civil suits, this is what was left." He handed her a check. It was for a substantial, multi-million-dollar sum, the last dregs of Julian's shattered empire. Elara looked at it. It was blood money. She walked over to her desk and, without hesitating, signed the back of it. She handed it back to her father. "The Elara Sterling Foundation," she said, her voice clear and strong, "for victims of domestic abuse, for the women who don't have a code, sparrow to call, for the women who are told they're unstable and pathetic." Arthur looked at the check, then at his daughter. He saw the Lara she had wanted to be, kind, empathetic, strong, and he saw the Sterling she was, commanding, decisive, and powerful. He nodded, a rare, genuine smile of pride on his face. "I'll have the lawyers file the paperwork this afternoon. It's a good start." He looked back at his granddaughter. "Now, Aurora, let's discuss leveraged buyouts." Elara laughed, a real, full laugh that echoed in the warm, safe room. She took her daughter from her father's arms and held her close, looking out at the clean, white, endless snow. The cage was broken, the wolf was in a concrete den, and the sparrow, finally, was free. In the end, Julian Hayes's millions were nothing against the power of a father's love and the unbreakable will of a survivor. Elara and her child, Aurora, proved that the deepest scars don't have to define your future. They can be the very things that forge your greatest strength. From a penthouse prison to a beacon of hope, her story is a testament that even in the darkest nights, a new dawn can rise. What did you think of Arthur's revenge? Was it justice, or just a different kind of power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and powerful stories of survival. We'll see you in the next one.